You know, if you didn't dress like a nun, maybe someone would actually notice you, Tanner smirked, yanking at Maya's hoodie and exposing the thin white fabric underneath. Laughter echoed down the hallway. But Maya didn't flinch, she didn't even blink. She just looked at him with a stillness that made everything around her go quiet. What no one knew was that her father, a retired Marine and judo master, had given her permission just hours before, one flip. If they push you again. And now Tanner had pushed. What happened next wasn't caught in slow motion, but it felt like it. 1 second he was laughing, next he was airborne. And the moment his back hit that bench, everything in the East Corridor changed. The question is, why did she wait until now? And what was Tanner's father hiding that made this flip turn into a full-blown scandal? The hallways of Northwood High were a loud, churning river of bodies, and 16-year-old Maya Brooks had perfected the art of being a stone at the bottom, unseen and undisturbed. She moved with a practiced quietness, her shoulders curved slightly inward, her head angled just enough toward the floor to avoid catching anyone's eye. Her worn gray hoodie was more than clothing, it was her camouflage, a soft gray shell to blend in with the lockers and the pale, flickering fluorescent lights overhead. She didn't need to look up to know what was happening around her. The whispers followed her like static. There goes the military brat. The voice belonged to a girl with bright pink highlights she saw in chemistry class. My brother said her dad's like a total psycho. Makes her do 1,000 push-ups before breakfast. This came from a lanky basketball player who often sat behind her in history. Total training freak, another voice concluded. Maya's expression was a carefully maintained mask of calm indifference. She'd learned years ago that any reaction, a flinch, a frown, a tear, was a victory for them. So she gave them nothing. She glided past the gleaming trophy cases, their glass-protecting football signed by last year's heroes and shimmering cheerleading trophies. Her own awards, including a state-level judo medal, were tucked away in a shoebox in her closet, gathering dust. They didn't belong here. They were from a different life. Her day began in the pre-dawn stillness, long before the chaos of school. Breakfast was a silent, unbreakable ritual. She and her father, Master Sergeant David Brooks, sat across from each other at the small, scarred kitchen table. The only sounds were the soft scrape of spoons in their oatmeal bowls and the hum of the old refrigerator. No morning news, no idle chatter. Their communication existed in the spaces between words. He would look at her, his eyes holding the quiet weight of things he'd seen in places far from this quiet suburban town, and he would give a single, almost imperceptible nod. It meant, I'm here. Stay the course. Be strong. After their meal, she'd slip out to the garage. Her father had built her a sanctuary there. The concrete floor was covered in smooth, resilient tatami mats. The air was cool and clean, smelling of wood, canvas, and honest effort. This was her true home. Here, barefoot on the mats, she wasn't the invisible girl from Northwood High. She wasn't a freak or a ghost. Here, she was powerful. Her movements were a language she had spoken since she was a child. A silent poetry of balance and force. Every morning she moved through her katas, the formal exercises of judo. The grace of a foot sweep, the controlled violence of a shoulder throw, the resilience of a perfect breakfall. It was all second nature, written into her muscles and her soul. She remembered the day she'd earned her black belt at 13. The sharp sting of pride, followed by a quiet sadness because she knew it was a part of her she had to hide from the world. She remembered the flash of the cameras at the state championship, the weight of the gold medal around her neck, and the strange, hollow feeling of victory that no one else would ever know about. Her greatest fear wasn't a punch or an insult. It was exposure. To be seen was to become a target. To be a target was to invite a confrontation that she had been taught to avoid at all costs. Her father believed that true strength was about control, not aggression. So she hid it all, the medal, the belt, the power, beneath a quiet demeanor and a baggy gray hoodie. She navigated the school like a ghost, her only goal to make it to the final bell so she could return to the warm, safe light of the dojo, the only place where she didn't have to be afraid of herself. The shriek of the final bell was supposed to be a signal of freedom, but for Maya, it was the start of the day's most dangerous gauntlet, the walk to the exit. It was in these last 10 minutes, when teachers were in their rooms and the halls were a lawless sea of students, that the sharks came out to hunt. That afternoon, she was just a few feet from her locker when a wall of muscle blocked her path. It was Tanner Holtz, the school's star quarterback, his grin as arrogant as the Letterman jacket draped over his shoulders. His two usual cronies, a lanky boy named Jake and a shorter, stockier one named Chris, fanned out on either side of him, smirking. Well, well, if it isn't Little Miss Mute, Tanner boomed, his voice echoing in the corridor. He was performing for the crowd that had started to gather. Still wearing that same sad, gray hoodie? What's the matter, Brooks? Afraid someone might actually see you. Maya focused on the combination lock in her hand, her fingers suddenly clumsy. Please let me get to my locker, Tanner. Her voice was so low it was almost lost in the noise. Jake snorted with laughter and pulled out his phone, hitting record. The small red light was a glaring, accusatory eye. Tanner's smirk widened. An audience always made him crueler. What was that? I can't hear you over how boring you are, he taunted, stepping closer until he was invading her personal space. The scent of cheap cologne was suffocating. Seriously, what are you hiding under there? Before she could react, he reached out and grabbed a fistful of her hoodie. Let's just take a little peek. He yanked. Hard. The worn fabric of her hoodie stretched, and with a sickening, tearing sound, the collar of the thin t-shirt underneath gave way. It wasn't a huge rip, just a 3-inch gash near her collarbone, but the violation was absolute. A wave of gasps and titters rippled through the onlookers. The cold air on her exposed skin felt like a brand. Her world tunneled. The sneering faces, the bright lens of the phone, the echoing laughter, it all faded into a dull roar. Her father's voice, a memory from a lesson on the dojo floor years ago, cut through the chaos. Never fight unless you are cornered, Maya. Anyone can throw a punch. True power isn't about making noise. It's about knowing when to be still. Was she cornered? Not yet. There was still an escape route. Humiliation wasn't a wall. She could walk away. And so she did. She dropped her gaze from Tanner's triumphant face, left her locker hanging open, and turned. She didn't run. That would give them too much satisfaction. She walked, each step a monumental effort of will, her back straight, her body a coiled spring of suppressed fury and shame. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, and she knew the video of her deepest humiliation was already being sent, shared, and laughed at before she even pushed open the school's heavy glass doors. That night, the dojo wasn't her sanctuary. It was her crucible. She didn't bother turning on the lights, moving instead in the dim glow of a single security lamp outside. Barefoot and breathing hard, she unleashed the storm that was raging inside her. The graceful forms became brutal, explosive movements. She pictured Tanner's leering face as she executed a perfect osotogari, a major outer reap, throwing an invisible opponent to the mat. She felt his grip on her wrist as she practiced a joint lock, her knuckles white. Sweat stung her eyes, but it was soon joined by hot, silent tears of rage. They streamed down her cheeks, a quiet testament to the pain she refused to show the world. She trained until her muscles screamed and her body ached, but the agony in her soul was a fire that wouldn't be quenched. We all know someone like Maya, someone quiet who holds so much inside. And we've all seen bullies like Tanner. Where are you watching this from today? Let us know in the comments and tell us what you're feeling for Maya in this moment. The next morning, the ritual was the same, but the silence at the breakfast table was heavier, thick with unspoken tension. David Brooks watched his daughter over the rim of his coffee mug. He saw the new tightness in her jaw, the way she avoided his gaze. He didn't press. He knew she would speak when she was ready or not at all. Later, in the dojo, her movements were sharp, efficient, but laced with a brittle anger. As she practiced her breakfalls, landing with more force than necessary, he stood in the doorway, his arms crossed. He watched her for a long time, his expression unreadable. As she rose from the mat after one particularly hard fall, her GI sleeve slid down her arm. That's when he saw it. A dark, ugly bruise in the distinct shape of fingers wrapped around her forearm. It was a stark mark of violence against her pale skin. His voice was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. Tell me what happened to your arm, Maya. It's nothing, she said automatically, her voice flat as she pulled the sleeve down. I ran into a door. He walked slowly onto the mats, his soft-soled shoes making no sound. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He didn't challenge her lie. He didn't demand the truth. He just stood there, his gaze patient and unwavering, a silent testament that he saw right through her defenses. That quiet, relentless knowing was what finally undid her. A single, choked sob broke free from her chest. The walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart didn't just crack, they shattered. The immense weight of her loneliness, her frustration, and her shame came pouring out in a flood of tears. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the mat, hiding her face in her hands. I hate it there, she whispered, the words torn from her. I hate them. I hate feeling so weak. I'm not weak, Dad. But I let them make me feel weak. David rested a heavy, calloused hand on her trembling shoulder. He let her cry, understanding that some battles had to be fought with tears before they could be fought with anything else. After a long moment, he stood and walked into the small, cluttered office at the back of the garage. It was his personal space, filled with pictures of his Marine unit, a folded American flag in a triangular case, and shelves of books on strategy and philosophy. He returned a minute later holding a rolled-up scroll of paper, tied with a simple black ribbon. He knelt in front of her again, his movements deliberate and calm. He placed the scroll on the mat beside her. It was her first-degree black belt certificate, the proof of an honor she had hidden away. "You earned this when you were 13, he said, his voice a low rumble. "You faced down girls bigger and older than you, and you never lost your composure. You were the strongest person in that building. Nothing about you has changed. This paper doesn't give you power, Maya. It just recognizes the power you've always had." She looked from the scroll to her father's face, seeing the faint scars and deep lines that told the story of his own life of discipline and combat. "But all the lessons, you always said to walk away. That control is everything." "Control is not the same as surrender," he corrected her gently. "A warrior knows when to sheath his sword, but he never forgets how to draw it. There's a difference between avoiding a fight and allowing yourself to be victimized." A new resolve began to solidify in her chest, cooling the hot shame. She looked him square in the eye, her own tears drying. "What if I have to use it?" she asked, the question a heavy stone dropped into the quiet pool of the morning. "What if I can't walk away next time?" Master Sergeant David Brooks looked at his daughter and saw not the crying child on the floor, but the warrior he had raised. "Then you do it," he said, his voice as solid as granite. "You do it once. And you do it with purpose." The air in Northwood High felt different to Maya the next morning. Or maybe it was she who was different. She still wore her gray hoodie, but it was no longer a cloak of invisibility. It was just a piece of clothing. She walked with her head up, her spine straight. Her eyes, usually downcast, now scanned the crowded hallway with a placid, analytical calm. She wasn't prey anymore. She was simply a girl walking to her class. Beneath the hoodie, against her skin, was her secret. She wore the heavy, black cotton top of her judo gi. She had tied the belt securely around her waist before pulling the sweatshirt over it. It was her armor, a tangible connection to the dojo, to her father, and to the strength she had decided, finally, to own. Putting it on that morning had been a ritual, a silent declaration of war against her own fear. The inevitable confrontation came near the science wing. Tanner Holtz, propped against a locker and holding court with his friends, saw her coming. A cruel, confident laugh escaped him. He saw the same girl, the same hoodie, and assumed nothing had changed. He saw her as an easy target for another round of public amusement. "Hey, look!" The crybaby came back for more, he yelled, getting a smattering of laughs from his circle. To punctuate his joke, he deliberately stepped into her direct path, bumping her hard in the shoulder. "Still hiding in that ugly thing?" This time, Maya didn't stumble. She didn't flinch. She simply stopped, planting her feet. She turned her head slowly and looked directly into his eyes. Her face was a mask of pure, unnerving calm. "Don't," she said. The word was not a plea. It was a command. It was spoken so quietly that only Tanner and those within a few feet could hear it, but it carried an astonishing weight. It stopped him cold. He blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. This was not the reaction he expected. But his arrogance, fed by years of unchecked power, quickly reasserted itself. "Or what?" he sneered, his pride stung. "You gonna cry again?" And then he made the mistake that would change everything. He reached out, his hand moving in what felt like slow motion, and wrapped his fingers around her wrist, intending to yank her toward him. The moment his skin touched hers, a switch flipped deep inside Maya. A lifetime of training, of discipline, of suppressed power surged to the surface. Her body moved before her mind had time to think. It was instinct. It was purpose. In a single, seamless motion, she used his grip against him. She stepped into his space, pivoting on the ball of her right foot. Her hip became a fulcrum, perfectly positioned under his center of gravity. His own forward momentum became her weapon. The world seemed to drop away as she executed a flawless Ippon Sui Nage, a classic one-arm shoulder throw. Tanner Holtz, all 200 pounds of him, was lifted from the floor as if he were a child. For a breathtaking second, he was airborne, a look of utter shock on his face as he sailed over her shoulder in a clean, graceful arc. He landed flat on his back on the hard wooden bench that lined the hallway. The impact produced a loud, sickening thwack that echoed through the now silent corridor, followed by the pained grunt of air being forced from his lungs. The hallway, a moment before a cacophony of chatter and laughter, was now utterly silent. Every single student was frozen, their mouths agape. Phones were out, but the expressions behind them were not of mockery. They were of pure, unadulterated shock and awe. Maya stood over Tanner's gasping form, her breathing perfectly even, her wrists now free. Her face was as calm as it had been before. She had done it. Once. With purpose. Sometimes one single moment can change everything. If you believe in the power of standing up for yourself, make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you don't miss what happens next. The spell of stunned silence was broken by a pathetic, wheezing sound from the bench. She attacked me. Tanner whined, trying to push himself up and failing. I didn't do anything. She just attacked me. A few students snickered at the absurdity of his claim. He grabbed her first. Someone yelled from the back of the crowd. Miss Alvarez, the science teacher, was the first adult on the scene. She rushed out of her classroom, her eyes wide as she took in the sight of the school star athlete on his back and quiet Maya Brooks standing over him, looking completely composed. The vice principal, Mr. Henderson, came jogging down the hall moments later, his face flushed with alarm. What in the world is going on here? He demanded, his voice strained. Maya didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her defense was already being replayed on a dozen phones, the footage clear and undeniable. She calmly allowed Mr. Henderson to escort her to the principal's office, walking through the crowd of students who now parted for her like the Red Sea. The principal's office was thick with tension. Principal Thompson, a man whose main priority was maintaining the school's placid reputation, stared at Maya as if she were a foreign object he didn't know how to classify. My office is calling your father, young lady, he said, his tone dripping with disapproval. This kind of violence will not be tolerated. An hour later, Master Sergeant David Brooks entered the office. He hadn't come in his usual civilian clothes. He was wearing his Marine Corps dress blues, the dark blue jacket adorned with rows of ribbons and polished metals that spoke of honor, courage, and commitment. He moved with an unshakable quietness that instantly commanded the room. He stood beside his daughter's chair, a silent, formidable presence. Coach Holtz was already there, pacing and red-faced. This is an outrage, he bellowed. My son, the star of our football program, assaulted in the hallway. He could have been seriously injured. I want this girl expelled. Principal Thompson, clearly intimidated by the coach's influence, turned to David. Master Sergeant Brooks, your daughter's actions were extreme. David's gaze was like ice. He looked from the sputtering coach to the whimpering Tanner, then to the principal. Sir, have you reviewed the video evidence? He asked, his voice low and level. I've been briefed on the situation, the principal hedged. Then you know that young man put his hands on my daughter first, David stated, not as a question, but as a fact. You know that he and his friends have been harassing her. Your staff saw it. Your students saw it. Your school did nothing. He paused, letting the word sink in. He then looked directly at Coach Holtz. You didn't fail him, he said, nodding at Tanner. Then his eyes locked onto the principal. You failed her. The air went out of the room. Coach Holtz's blustering stopped. The argument was over. Tanner, who had been checked by the nurse, was diagnosed with a bruised back and a severely wounded pride. Meanwhile, the new video was an inferno online. The narrative had been flipped as neatly as Tanner had been. Captions read, Bully gets a lesson in physics, and this is what happens when you mess with a quiet girl. The students of Northwood High were buzzing, and the verdict was unanimous. Maya was a hero. The administration was trapped. Their zero-tolerance policy was clear, but suspending the victim who had so spectacularly defended herself would ignite a public relations nightmare. The formal meeting the next day felt more like a surrender negotiation. In the principal's office sat Maya and her father, across from a much more subdued Coach Holtz and his son. The talk of pressing charges had evaporated as soon as the coach realized the viral video made his son look like both a bully and a fool. Look, we just want to put this behind us, Coach Holtz said, his voice strained. Tanner has learned his lesson. He's prepared to offer a formal apology. Principal Thompson looked at Maya, clearly hoping for a simple resolution. Ms. Brooks, what would you consider a fair outcome? Maya had spent the morning discussing this very question with her father, amidst the familiar, calming scent of the dojo. She knew what justice looked like to her, and it wasn't about revenge. I don't want him suspended, she said, her voice clear and steady. The relief on the faces of the principal and the coach was palpable. And we have no intention of involving the police. But she continued, her gaze shifting to Tanner, who flinched. I do have an alternative. She looked at him, and for the first time, he held her gaze. He saw no malice there, only a profound and unsettling calm. Tanner and his friends Jake and Chris will report to my father's dojo every Saturday morning for the next 4 weeks. They will be there at 6 a.m. sharp. And they will clean the mats. Principal Thompson stared bewildered. Clean the mats? I don't understand. This is a disciplinary issue, not a janitorial one. Your disciplinary system failed, Maya stated simply. It punishes actions but doesn't teach anything. My father's way is different. It's about building character. It's about understanding where real strength comes from. She paused, letting her words fill the quiet room. It doesn't come from putting people down. It comes from humbling yourself. They'll learn that on their hands and knees. They'll learn respect. Faced with this unusual but elegantly crafted solution and desperate to make the whole problem disappear, the school and Coach Holtz quickly agreed. The first Saturday was brutal. The 3 boys arrived in the cold darkness, looking resentful and exhausted. David Brooks met them at the door, a silent, imposing figure. He didn't lecture them. He simply pointed to the buckets, the cloths, and the vast expanse of white mats. He instructed them, in a low, firm voice, to bow before entering the training space, a gesture of respect they performed with awkward reluctance. For 2 solid hours they scrubbed. It was back-breaking, tedious work. Their knees ached. Their hands grew raw. There was no talking, only the sound of their own labored breathing and the rhythmic swish of rags on the mats. The second Saturday, as Maya was practicing her forms in a corner of the dojo, Tanner stopped his scrubbing. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the mat he had just cleaned. I'm sorry, he said, his voice quiet and hoarse. He wasn't looking at his father or the principal. He was looking at her. For everything. For the hoodie, for what I said. I was an idiot. There's no excuse. It wasn't the coerced apology from the office. It was genuine, born of exhaustion and humility. Maya paused her kata and simply nodded. I know, she said. Now finish the floor. We missed a spot over here. On the hard, clean floor of the dojo, a bully was learning a lesson that no detention ever could have taught him. Word of the judo flip and its strange aftermath became the stuff of legend at Northwood High. The East Corridor, the site of Maya's public humiliation and ultimate triumph, was transformed. No one whispered insults as she passed. Instead, she received nods of respect, and students instinctively cleared a path for her. She hadn't sought power, but she had earned a different kind of authority, one that came from quiet confidence. A few weeks later, Ms. Alvarez caught up with her after class. The teacher had a look of thoughtful admiration on her face. Maya, she started, I have to admit, I felt terrible that day. I saw what was happening, but I didn't intervene until it was over. I was a bystander. She took a breath. I've been thinking a lot about that. About all the girls in this school who feel scared or invisible, just like you did. I'm putting together a self-defense workshop and I was wondering. I'd be honored if you would help me lead it. Maya's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of standing in front of a group, of being the center of attention, was terrifying. But then she pictured a dozen versions of her former self, girls who walked with their heads down, who made themselves small to avoid trouble. She thought of how desperately she would have wanted someone to show her that she didn't have to be afraid. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but firm. I'll do it. The following week, the school gym was buzzing with nervous energy. Dozens of girls had shown up, a mix of the loud and confident and the shy and withdrawn. Maya stood before them, not as a loud instructor but as a quiet guide. She didn't lecture. She demonstrated. She showed them how to find their center of gravity, how to use an attacker's momentum against them, how to break a simple wrist grab with technique, not force. She noticed one girl in the back, smaller than the rest, who looked terrified. Maya walked over and spoke to her one-on-one, gently correcting her stance until the girl successfully executed the move. The flash of surprised empowerment on that girl's face was more rewarding than any championship medal. Her story rippled even further. A small community newsletter for local veterans and their families ran a piece on it. The article was short, but it captured the essence of what had happened. It was titled, A Flip, a Name, a Legacy. When her father showed it to her, he pointed at the words, a rare, proud gleam in his eye. The East Corridor was no longer a place of bad memories. It was just a hallway. She had rewritten its history for herself and for everyone else. She walked through it now with her chin held high. Months later, life at Northwood High had settled into a new normal. The story of Maya and Tanner had become a cautionary tale for bullies and a source of inspiration for everyone else. Maya had found a peaceful existence, a quietness born of confidence, not fear. One afternoon, as she was heading to her locker, she passed the freshman wing. She saw a scene that was painfully familiar. Two bigger sophomore boys had a lanky freshman pinned against his locker, laughing as they tried to jostle his books from his arms. The freshman's face was pale with fear and humiliation. Maya didn't hesitate. She didn't shout or run. She simply altered her course and walked calmly toward them. She didn't say a word as she stepped between the freshman and his tormentors, positioning herself as a silent, human shield. She just folded her arms and waited, her expression neutral. The lead bully looked up, a sneer already forming on his lips. "Mind your own business," he started, then he saw her face. Recognition dawned. His eyes widened slightly. He had heard the legend. He glanced at his friend, who had also frozen, then back at Maya's calm, unblinking gaze. The silent challenge was more intimidating than any threat could have been. Without another word, the bully backed away, grabbing his friend's arm and pulling him down the hall. They vanished around the corner. One flip had been enough. Her reputation had become her shield. Maya gave the stunned freshman a small, encouraging nod before continuing on to her own locker. When she opened the metal door, a small folded piece of notebook paper fluttered out. She picked it up. The handwriting inside was shaky, clearly written by a young hand. "Because of you, I stayed. Thank you." She closed her eyes for a moment, the simple note feeling heavier and more valuable than any trophy. She smiled a small, private smile. The scene fades to the backyard dojo, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. The air is peaceful. Maya is not alone. She is on the mats with 3 young girls, none older than 10. She is patiently adjusting the stance of the smallest girl, her voice soft but clear. "Your power comes from the ground. Feel your balance." From the doorway, Master Sergeant David Brooks watches, out of uniform, just a father. A proud, gentle smile touches his lips as he sees the legacy he built being passed on not with force, but with grace. Maya's voice carries in the evening air, repeating a lesson that is now truly her own. "You don't have to fight every battle," she tells the girls. "But you always need to know that you can." This is just one story of an underdog finding their strength and changing their world. If stories like Maya's inspire you, be sure to check the comments below for a full playlist of more tales of quiet heroes who found their voice.